to help each other out. People all over the world send emergency.
The storm had escalated, was severe.
This is Mark Watney, and I'm in a hab designed to last. I can figure out a way to make contact with NASA. Mark Watney.
We die.
Imagine waking up alone on Mars. No team, no rescue, and no way home. Every breath could be your last. Every mistake could kill you. But what if the greatest survival story ever told wasn't science fiction, it felt real? Today on ReelSignal Studio, we're uncovering the incredible journey of the Martian, the movie that redefined space survival. From shocking behind-the-scenes facts and hidden details to its massive box office success and unforgettable moments, this is the complete story of the film that proved one man could survive against an entire planet. Stay until the end, because some of these facts will completely change the way you see The Martian forever. The Martian is a 2015 science fiction movie directed by Ridley Scott and written by Drew Goddard. The film is based on the 2011 novel by Andy Weir and was released by 20th Century Fox. It stars Matt Damon in the lead role, with a talented cast that includes Jessica Chastain, Jeff Daniels, Kristen Wiig, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Sean Bean, Michael Pate+A, Kate Mara, Sebastian Stan, and Mackenzie Davis. The story follows an astronaut who is accidentally left behind on Mars after his crew believes he has died during a powerful storm. Alone on the dangerous planet, he must use his intelligence, courage, and creativity to stay alive while NASA and his teammates work together to bring him safely back to Earth. The movie began development after 20th Century Fox bought the film rights to Andy Weir's novel in March 2013. Drew Goddard adapted the book into a screenplay and was originally planned to direct the movie as well. However, the project moved forward only after Ridley Scott became the director and Matt Damon was chosen to play the main character, Mark Watney. Filming started in November 2014 and continued for about 70 days. The production had a budget of around $108 million. To create the realistic world of Mars, the filmmakers built 20 large sets on one of the biggest sound stages in Budapest, Hungary. They also filmed many outdoor scenes in the beautiful desert of Wadi Rum in Jordan, whose rocky landscape closely resembles the surface of Mars. The Martian had its world premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival on September 11, 2015. It was released in the United Kingdom on September 30, 2015, and in the United States on October 2, 2015. The movie was shown in several formats, including 2D, 3D, IMAX 3D, and 4DX, allowing audiences to enjoy an even more immersive experience. After its release, the film received outstanding reviews from both critics and audiences. Viewers praised its exciting story, realistic science, emotional moments, humor, and Matt Damon's excellent performance. The movie became a huge box office success, earning more than $630 million worldwide. It was the 10th highest-grossing film of 2015 and became the highest-grossing movie of Ridley Scott's career. The Martian was also recognized as one of the best films of the year by the National Board of Review and the American Film Institute. It received many awards and nominations, including 7 nominations at the 88th Academy Awards, making it one of the most celebrated science fiction films of its time. In the year 2035, the Ares 3 mission is carrying out the manned expedition on Mars. The crew has been living and working on the planet for 18 sols, which are Martian days, and they are supposed to stay for a total of 31 sols. Everything is going according to plan until a massive dust storm suddenly hits their landing site. The storm becomes so powerful that it threatens to destroy their equipment and even tip over the Mars ascent vehicle, the spacecraft they need to leave the planet. Realizing that staying any longer could cost everyone their lives, Mission Commander Melissa Lewis orders the crew to stop the mission and evacuate immediately. As the astronauts rush through the violent storm toward the launch vehicle, a large piece of flying debris crashes into astronaut Mark Watney, throwing him far away from the others. His suit is badly damaged, and the sensors show no signs of life. Because they cannot see him through the storm and the launch vehicle is seconds away from tipping over, Commander Lewis is forced to make the heartbreaking decision to leave without him. Believing Mark is dead, The crew launches safely and boards their spacecraft, Hermes, before beginning the long journey back to Earth. After the storm finally passes, something unexpected happens. Mark Watney suddenly wakes up on the surface of Mars. He is badly injured and hears the warning alarms inside his damaged spacesuit because his oxygen is running low. Fighting through the pain, he slowly makes his way back to the hab, the living base where the crew had been staying. Once inside, he discovers that a long metal antenna has pierced his body. Carefully, he removes it and treats his wound. The antenna and the blood around it had temporarily sealed the hole in his suit, preventing him from losing all his air and saving his life. Now completely alone on Mars, Mark quickly realizes the terrible truth. NASA believes he is dead, and no rescue mission is coming. The next planned mission to Mars, Ares 4, will not arrive for another 4 years. If he wants to survive until then, he must find a way to produce food, water, and power with only the limited supplies left inside the hab. After checking his supplies, Mark calculates that he has enough packaged food to survive for only about 300 Martian days. Since rescue is still years away, he knows he must grow his own food. Using his knowledge as a botanist, he creates a small farm inside the hab. He plants potatoes that were originally brought for the crew's Thanksgiving dinner. Since Martian soil cannot support life, he mixes it with bacteria taken from the crew's stored human waste to make it fertile. To produce water, he carefully extracts hydrogen from leftover rocket fuel and combines it with oxygen through a dangerous chemical process. Every step is risky, but Mark refuses to give up. To stay positive, he records video diaries, joking about his situation even during the hardest moments. Mark also starts improving one of the Mars rovers. Normally, the rover can only travel about 35 kilometers before it needs to recharge. However, the Ares 4 landing site is located at Schiaparelli crater, around 3,200 kilometers away. Mark spends weeks testing different ideas to increase the rover's battery life and carrying capacity, knowing that one day he will have to make the long journey across the planet. Back on Earth, NASA continues studying satellite images of Mars. During a routine inspection, Mars mission director Vincent Kapoor and satellite planner Minty Park notice something surprising. Objects around the hab appear to be moving, something impossible if Mark were truly dead. After carefully examining more images, they realize that Mark Watney is actually alive. NASA immediately begins working on a way to contact him and rescue him. However, NASA Director Teddy Sanders decides not to tell the crew aboard Hermes that Mark survived. He fears that learning the truth would distract them from their mission and put their own lives at risk. Instead, NASA focuses on restoring communication with Mark. They remember the old Pathfinder probe, which landed on Mars years earlier and still remains on the surface. Mark drives the rover across dangerous terrain to recover the Pathfinder. After repairing it, NASA uses its rotating camera to establish a simple communication system. At first, they communicate using basic signs, but later NASA upgrades the system so they can exchange typed text messages. Mark even jokes with the team by posing like a famous TV character in one of the photographs, giving everyone on Earth a much-needed laugh. As time passes, Mark's potato farm grows successfully, giving everyone hope that he can survive long enough for rescue. NASA engineers begin designing a supply spacecraft that can deliver food and equipment before the Ares 4 mission arrives. Flight director Mitch Henderson and engineer Bruce Ang work day and night to prepare the mission. Because there is not enough time for normal safety procedures, Teddy Sanders decides to skip several important inspections to launch the rocket sooner. Sadly, the plan ends in disaster. Only moments after liftoff, the supply rocket explodes, destroying all the food and equipment meant for Mark. At the same time, Mark faces another terrible setback on Mars. An airlock inside the hab suddenly explodes because of pressure failure. The explosion destroys his entire potato farm, leaving him once again with very little food. The situation becomes even more desperate. Just when hope seems lost, the China National Space Administration offers NASA a powerful rocket booster that can carry supplies toward Mars. While NASA begins preparing a new supply mission, brilliant scientist Rich Pernell comes up with a completely different idea. Instead of sending supplies directly to Mars, he suggests using the Chinese booster to resupply the Hermes spacecraft during a flyby of Earth. Hermes could then use Earth's gravity to slingshot back toward Mars and rescue Mark much sooner. Although the plan is risky, it gives Mark the best chance of survival. Teddy Sanders rejects the idea because he does not want to endanger the Hermes crew. Mitch Henderson secretly sends Rich Purnell's rescue plan to Commander Lewis aboard Hermes. After discussing the risks together, every crew member votes to return to Mars and rescue their friend. Their decision goes against NASA's orders, but once they commit to the mission, NASA has no choice except to support them. Hermes successfully receives supplies from the Chinese rocket and begins its long journey back toward Mars. After surviving alone on Mars for 459 sols, Mark prepares for the final stage of his rescue. He packs everything he needs into the modified rover and begins an incredible 3,200-kilometer journey across the harsh Martian landscape toward Schiaparelli crater, where the Mars ascent vehicle for the Ares 4 mission has already landed. The trip takes around 90 sols. He powers the rover using solar panels taken from the hub and carefully manages every resource to stay alive. When Mark reaches the launch site, he realizes that the Mars ascent vehicle is too heavy to reach the altitude needed to meet Hermes. Following NASA's instructions, he removes almost everything that is not absolutely necessary, including windows, seats, and many outer panels. The spacecraft looks almost empty, but it becomes light enough to launch. The Hermes crew remotely starts the launch sequence, and Mark blasts off from Mars. Although he successfully reaches space, he is still too far away from Hermes for a safe docking. The Hermes crew quickly comes up with another solution. They fire the spacecraft's thrusters and even release part of the ship's atmosphere through explosive decompression to slightly change its speed and direction. Commander Lewis leaves the spacecraft using a maneuvering unit and flies toward Mark, but she still cannot quite reach him. Thinking quickly, Mark pokes a hole in the glove of his spacesuit and uses the escaping air like a small rocket engine to push himself through space. The risky plan works perfectly, and Lewis grabs him just before he drifts away forever. The crew welcomes Mark back aboard Hermes, and people around the world celebrate as they watch the successful rescue live. After finally returning to Earth, Mark begins a new chapter of his life. He becomes a survival instructor for future astronauts, teaching them that every problem has a solution if they stay calm, think carefully, and never stop trying. Years later, as the Ares V mission prepares to launch toward Mars, the people who helped save Mark have all moved forward with their lives, inspired by one incredible story of courage, teamwork, intelligence, and the determination to never give up, no matter how impossible the situation may seem. Matt Damon delivers a tour-de-force performance as Dr. Mark Watney, the botanist and mechanical engineer stranded on Mars. His portrayal anchors the entire film, carrying the weight of long solo sequences where he must convey ingenuity, humor, despair, and resilience entirely through voice-over diaries and physical action. Damon's everyman charm makes Watney relatable. He is not a superhuman astronaut but a resourceful scientist who science the shit out of his predicament. Damon's preparation involved deep collaboration with Ridley Scott on a line-by-line, moment-by-moment breakdown of the script. Rather than extensive physical astronaut training like some co-stars, Damon focused on embodying the problem-solving mindset. On set in Budapest's massive sound stages, he worked with actual potato plants grown in adjacent facilities to simulate the hab's garden scenes authentically. This hands-on approach helped him internalize the character's isolation and creativity. The role demanded physical transformation and endurance. Damon lost significant weight to depict the toll of survival, mirroring the character's starvation threats after the airlock explosion destroys his potato crop. His performance balances the novel's witty internal monologue with visual storytelling, affixing the hab, modifying the rover, and executing the risky mob ascent. Critics noted how Damon avoided making Watney seem glib. The humor underscores the high stakes rather than diminishing them. Watney's arc tests human adaptability. Damon portrays the initial shock of awakening injured after the storm, the growing confidence in his botany and engineering hacks, like producing water from rocket fuel, and the profound loneliness during the long rover journey to Schiaparelli crater. His video logs provide comic relief. Disco music jokes, complaints about the crew's taste Tessa while subtly revealing vulnerability. The final rescue sequence showcases Damon's physicality as Watney improvises by piercing his suit for thrust, a moment of desperate ingenuity. Damon's casting was pivotal. After Drew Goddard's initial involvement, Scott's attachment and Damon's interest greenlit the project. His star power helped secure the budget, but his acting pedigree eroded in roles requiring intelligence and charm like Good Will Hunting a perfectly suited the character. Watney is optimistic yet pragmatic, traits Damon conveys effortlessly. The performance earned Oscar buzz and cemented the film's success, grossing over $630 million. Throughout, Damon humanizes the science. Scenes of him calculating resources, narrating failures, and celebrating small wins, like the first potato harvest, feel authentic because of his commitment. His chemistry with the ensemble, even via delayed communications, elevates the ensemble dynamic. Damon's Watney embodies the film's core message: human curiosity and problem-solving can overcome seemingly impossible odds. Jessica Chastain as Commander Melissa Lewis. Jessica Chastain brings steely competence and emotional depth to Commander Melissa Lewis, the Ares 3 mission commander. As a USN submarine warfare officer, oceanographer, and geologist, Lewis must make the heartbreaking decision to leave Watney behind during the evacuation. Chastain's portrayal captures the commander's burden of leadership, guilt over abandoning a crewmate balanced against responsibility for the remaining 5 lives. Chastain prepared rigorously. She visited the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, and Johnson Space Center, shadowing astronaut Tracy Caldwell Dyson. Dyson's matter-of-fact demeanor inspired Chastain, who modeled Lewis's straightforward professionalism after her. Chastain trained in facilities, experienced virtual Mars simulations, and discussed astronaut life details, even mundane ones like wedding rings in space. This research informed her performance, lending credibility to technical scenes in the high-stakes return maneuver on the Hermes. In this film, Lewis's arc involves guilt during the journey home, the crew's vote to attempt the risky slingshot rescue, and her personal piloting of the manned maneuvering unit to reach Watney. Chastain conveys quiet intensity in these moments, particularly the improvised airlock explosion to slow the ship and the climactic tether rescue. Her leadership inspires the crew's unanimous decision, highlighting themes of loyalty and collective risk-taking. Chastain's chemistry with the Ares crew won Michael Pate +- as Rick Martinez, Kate Mara's Beth Johansson, Sebastian Stan's Chris Beck, and Axel Hennie's Alex Vogel feels lived in. She projects authority without arrogance, warmth without sentimentality. The performance underscores the film's realistic depiction of NASA operations, where commanders balance protocol with humanity. Chastain's work adds emotional stakes to the ensemble sequences on the Hermes, contrasting Damon's solo survival. Chiwetel Ejiofor as Vincent Kapoor. Chiwetel Ejiofor portrays Vincent Kapoor, originally Venkat in the novel, NASA's director of Mars missions. Ejiofor brings gravitas and quiet determination, navigating bureaucratic pressures, media scrutiny, and the high-stakes rescue coordination. His performance grounds the Earth-based NASA sequences in professionalism and subtle urgency. The casting sparked controversy from the Media Action Network for Asian Americans, MANA, who criticized it as whitewashing since the novel described an Asian Indian character. Ejiofor's nuanced take portraying Kapoor as a capable administrator with personal stake helped mitigate some concerns, and author Andy Weir defended the choice, noting characters' backgrounds were not rigidly defined. Ejiofor's chemistry with Jeff Daniels' Daddy Sanders and Benedict Wong's Bruce Ang creates believable mission control tension. Ejiofor excels in scenes realizing Watney is alive, collaborating on a Pathfinder recovery, and debating the Rich Pernell slingshot maneuver. His expressive face conveys the weight of decisions that could save or doom an astronaut, adding layers to the film's exploration of institutional problem-solving. Kristen Wiig as Annie Montrose. Kristen Wiig's casting as Annie Montrose, NASA's Director of Media Relations, was initially seen as unconventional but proves inspired. Wiig brings sharp wit and comedic timing to the role, humanizing the public-facing side of the crisis. She handles press conferences with a mix of poised underlying stress, providing levity amid tension. Wiig's performance shines in scenes managing the global media frenzy after Watney's survival is revealed. Her deadpan delivery and subtle reactions contrast the more serious NASA administrators, reflecting the film's blend of humor and drama. This choice aligns with the source material's tone, where public relations plays a key logistical and emotional role. Jeff Daniels as Theodore Teddy Sanders. Jeff Daniels embodies NASA Administrator Teddy Sanders with authoritative gravitas and moral complexity. Sanders makes tough calls, initially withholding information from the Hermes crew, bypassing safety protocols for a resupply, and resisting then accepting the Perno maneuver. Daniels conveys the bureaucratic tightrope of risk assessment and public accountability. His scenes opposite Ted Gielfer and Sean Bean's Mitch Henderson highlight interagency in personal conflicts. Daniels' steady presence anchors the high-level decision-making, making Sanders a believable leader under immense pressure. The performance adds weight to themes of institutional caution versus bold innovation. Michael Pay+A as Major Rick Martinez. Michael Pay+A as Major Rick Martinez, the Ares 3 MAV pilot and engineer, injects warmth and camaraderie. Pay+A as natural charisma makes Martinez the heart of the crew, providing emotional support and technical expertise. His performance and crew discussions about the rescue both feels genuine and heartfelt. Pay+A as everyman quality complements Damon's Watney, emphasizing the crew's bond. Scenes of Martinez monitoring systems or reacting to updates from Earth showcase his reliability and humor, enriching the ensemble dynamic. Kate Mara as Beth Johansson. Kate Mara plays systems operator Beth Johansson with intelligence and quiet strength. Her technical prowess and emotional connection to the crew, particularly in the rescue sequences, add depth. Mara's preparation included NASA visits, contributing to the authenticity of zero-gravity and systems management scenes. Johansson's role in the slingshot maneuver and final rescue highlights her competence, with Mara conveying focus and determination. Sebastian Stan as Dr. Chris Beck. Sebastian Stan's Dr. Chris Beck, the flight surgeon, brings medical expertise and emotional investment. His scenes emphasize the crew's concern for Watney and the physical challenges of the rescue. Stan's performance adds layers of friendship and professionalism to the Hermes team. Axel Henny as Dr. Alex Vogel. Axel Henny portrays German chemist and navigator Alex Vogel with precision and international flavor. His technical contributions and crew interactions enhance the multinational aspect of the mission. Henny's understated intensity fits the high-stakes environment. Mackenzie Davis as Mindy Park. Mackenzie Davis plays satellite planner Mindy Park, the first to notice Watney's activity. Her performance captures dedication and subtle emotional investment. The casting drew whitewashing criticism, but Davis delivers a sensitive portrayal of a crucial behind-the-scenes role. Benedict Wong's Bruce Ang, JPL director, provides technical authority and collaborative spirit. His work with Ed Gielfer on the Pathfinder and resupply efforts grounds the science in capable hands. Donald Glover as Rich Pernell. Donald Glover shines as quirky astrodynamicist Rich Pernell, whose slingshot maneuver idea proves pivotal. Glover infuses eccentricity and brilliance, delivering memorable scenes that blend humor with genius. His coffee-loving, unconventional approach contrasts bureaucratic rigidity. Supporting and ensemble contributions. Sean Bean as Mitch Henderson delivers passionate advocacy for transparency. The international cast members, including Chen Shu and Eddie Ko in Chinese Space Agency roles, broaden the global cooperation theme. Smaller roles like Nick Mohammad's Tim Grimes add texture to mission control. The casting under Ridley Scott and casting directors like Carmen Cuba and Nina Gold assembled a talented ensemble that balances star power with character acting. Practical effects, NASA consultations, and location work in Hungary and Jordan amplified performances. Controversies around certain castings sparked discussions on representation but did not detract from the film's acclaim. Each actor's commitment through research, physical preparation, and nuanced acting elevates The Martian beyond spectacle into a compelling human story. Damon's central performance drives the narrative, while the supporting cast creates a believable world of collaboration and ingenuity. The ensemble chemistry, technical authenticity, and tonal balance of humor and tension make the casting a cornerstone of the film's success. Extended sequences, character backstories implied through dialogue and action, and the film's celebration of STEM all stem from these carefully chosen portrayals. Production, development and pre-production. The story of how The Martian came to the screen begins not in a Hollywood boardroom but with a self-published novel that built its audience one curious reader at a time. Andy Weir's book had already developed a devoted following before traditional publishing or film studios took serious notice, and that grassroots momentum is part of what eventually caught the attention of executives at 20th Century Fox. The studio moved to secure the rights to the story in March 2013, optioning the novel and setting in motion a development process that would take roughly 2 years to reach theaters. Producer Simon Kinberg was the person Fox turned to first, and he became attached to shepherd the novel through its transformation from book to screenplay to finished film. Kinberg's involvement was critical in the earliest stages because adapting a story like The Martian required someone who understood both the commercial appeal of the survival narrative and the technical density of the source material. The novel itself was unusual in structure, built heavily around journal entries, technical problem solving, and a narrator who explains complex engineering and chemistry concepts to the reader in a conversational, often comedic voice. Translating that internal, diary-like format into a visual medium was always going to be one of the central creative challenges of the project, and Kinberg's early decisions about who would write the screenplay shaped everything that followed. In May 2013, just 2 months after the option was secured, Fox entered into negotiations with screenwriter and director Drew Goddard to both write and direct the film adaptation. Goddard was an intriguing choice at the time. He had built a reputation as a sharp, genre-savvy writer through his television work and had directed The Cabin in the Woods, a film that demonstrated his ability to subvert and play with established genre conventions while still delivering an entertaining and coherent narrative. For a project like The Martian, which needed to balance hard science, suspense, and humor, Goddard's sensibilities seemed like a natural fit. Goddard proceeded to write a full screenplay for the film, and his script became the foundation on which the eventual production was built. Even after Goddard departed the project as director, his screenplay remained essentially the one that carried the film forward, a testament to how well he had managed to compress and restructure Weir's dense, technical novel into something that worked as a piece of visual storytelling. Matt Damon, who would go on to star in the finished film, became attached to the project early during this period, expressing genuine enthusiasm about the prospect of working with Goddard as director. Damon's interest in the material at this stage is notable because it shows that the appeal of the project to its eventual star was not contingent on any particular director. Rather, Damon was drawn to the character of Mark Watney and the unique tone of the story itself. However, the project's path toward production was complicated when Goddard's career took an unexpected turn. He became interested in directing Sinister Six, a comic book film centered on a team of supervillains drawn from the Spider-Man universe, a project tied to Sony's then ambitious plans to build out a shared cinematic universe around Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery. Goddard's decision to pursue that opportunity effectively created an opening in the directorial chair for The Martian, even though his screenplay remained intact and would continue to serve as the script other directors would be attached to. This is where Kinberg's role as producer became pivotal once again. He brought the book and the existing screenplay to the attention of Ridley Scott, a filmmaker whose career had been defined in large part by ambitious, visually distinctive science fiction films, from Alien to Blade Runner to more recent efforts like Prometheus. Scott's track record in the genre made him an obvious creative match for a project that needed someone capable of rendering both the vastness of an alien landscape and the claustrophobic intensity of survival drama. In May 2014, Scott entered formal negotiations with the studio to direct the picture, with Matt Damon already cast as the stranded astronaut at the center of the story. This timeline is significant. Scott's direct involvement and Damon's casting happened essentially simultaneously, suggesting that the studio viewed these two pieces as interconnected and that momentum on one helped solidify the other. Scott has spoken about what attracted him to the material, explaining that he was drawn to the emphasis on scientific accuracy in problem-solving that ran through the story, and that he believed it was possible to strike a workable balance between pure entertainment and an educational, almost documentary-like fascination with how things actually work in space exploration. For Scott, a director known for building richly detailed worlds, the prospect of grounding a science fiction story in real, achievable technology rather than speculative fantasy was an appealing departure from some of his more overtly fantastical work. Damon, for his part, articulated a slightly different set of motivations for committing to the project. He pointed to three separate elements that drew him in: his admiration for Weir's original novel, his enthusiasm for the screenplay that had been crafted from it, and the simple professional appeal of having the chance to work with a director of Scott's caliber and reputation. The combination of a strong literary source, a well-regarded script, and a director with decades of genre filmmaking experience gave Damon confidence that the project had the ingredients necessary to succeed. Once Scott's commitment to direct was finalized, the project's development accelerated considerably. What had been a multi-year process of negotiation, false starts, and changing personnel suddenly gained real momentum, and the production was quickly approved by the studio. This rapid shift from prolonged uncertainty to swift studio approval illustrates how much weight a single attached filmmaker can carry in green-lighting decisions, particularly when that filmmaker has a demonstrated history of delivering films within the science fiction genre that perform well both critically and commercially. Interestingly, Goddard himself later reflected with evident generosity on having lost the directing job to Scott. Speaking to Creative Screenwriting, he admitted that he believed Scott had ultimately made a far better film than he himself would have been capable of directing. He described the experience of collaborating with Scott as remarkably easy, rooted in his deep admiration for the older director's body of work, and recalled moments of genuine disbelief and excitement simply at being in the same room as Scott during script discussions, almost starstruck at the realization that he was sitting across the table from a filmmaker he revered. This kind of candid admission from a screenwriter who effectively lost his directing opportunity speaks to the unusual collegiality that seemed to surround the production, at least according to public accounts from those involved. With Scott attached and Damon cast, the production team turned to assembling the rest of the ensemble and determining where the film would actually be shot. The choice of filming location became an important practical and logistical decision. The production settled on Cortis Studios, located approximately 26 kilometers, or about 16 miles, west of Budapest, Hungary, situated in the wine-producing village of Etek. The selection of this particular facility was driven largely by its scale. Cortis Studios contained one of the largest sound stages in the entire world, a physical attribute that made it uniquely suited to housing the elaborate, multi-room sets required to depict the various interior environments of the film, including the Martian habitat, the interior of the Hermes spacecraft, and NASA's mission control facilities. The decision to build out such an extensive physical production reflects a broader philosophy that seems to have guided Scott's approach to the film, a preference for tangible, practical sets over heavy reliance on digital environments, at least for the interior spaces where actors would need to interact with their surroundings in a believable, grounded way. This approach aligns with Scott's reputation as a director who has often emphasized physical production design throughout his career. Going back to the meticulously constructed sets of his earlier science fiction work, filming principal photography on The Martian began in Hungary on November 24, 2014, marking the start of what would become an intensive shooting schedule. The production constructed around 20 distinct sets to bring the film's various locations to life, an enormous undertaking that required extensive planning and craftsmanship from the art and construction departments. Crucially, the film was shot using 3D cameras throughout production, a choice that reflected the era's continued interest in stereoscopic theatrical presentation, particularly for large-scale science fiction spectacles where the technology could enhance the sense of depth and immersion in both the vast Martian exteriors and the more contained interior spaces. One of the more memorable and frequently discussed aspects of the physical production involved the film's central narrative device, Mark Watney's potato garden, which he cultivates inside the Martian habitat using the crew's biological waste mixed with Martian soil. Rather than relying on artificial props or digital effects to depict this garden, the production made the decision to actually grow real potatoes on a soundstage adjacent to the one being used for principal photography. This was not simply a single planting. The production staggered the planting schedule, putting potatoes in the ground at different times so that the plants would be at varying stages of growth and maturity when different scenes needed to depict the garden's progression over the course of Watney's time on Mars. This level of commitment to physical authenticity over digital shortcuts is emblematic of the broader approach the production took toward grounding the film's fantastical premise in tangible, observable reality. The depiction of the astronauts themselves required significant costume and prop work as well. A dedicated team of 6 people was responsible for constructing the spacesuits worn throughout the film, ultimately building a total of 15 suits to accommodate the needs of the production, including suits for different characters, suits that needed to show varying degrees of wear and damage, and likely backup suits in case of damage during the physically demanding shoot. While the bulk of the interior filming took place on the soundstages in Hungary, the production needed a location that could convincingly stand in for the alien, otherworldly terrain of the Martian surface for all of the film's exterior sequences. For this, the production turned to Wadi Rum, a UNESCO World Heritage Site located in Jordan, renowned for its dramatic desert landscape of towering sandstone and granite rock formations, vast stretches of red and pink sand, and a topography that has long struck filmmakers and photographers as otherworldly. The exterior sequences depicting the Martian surface were filmed in Wadi Rum over a period of 8 days in March 2015. This was far from the first time that filmmakers had turned to Wadi Rum to stand in for the surface of Mars. The location had previously been used for several other films set on the Red Planet, including Mission to Mars in 2000, Red Planet, also released in 2000, and The Last Days on Mars in 2013. This history establishes Wadi Rum as something of an established, almost traditional choice for Mars set productions, a desert landscape that filmmakers have repeatedly returned to because of its uniquely alien visual qualities, while also speaking to a broader trend within the genre. Taken together, the Hungarian soundstage work and the 8 days of Jordanian desert photography brought the total filming schedule to approximately 70 days. The production's relationship with Jordan extended beyond simply using the location for its visual qualities. It appears that a genuine relationship of mutual appreciation developed between the filmmakers and the host country. As a gesture of gratitude for the hospitality the cast and crew received while filming in Jordan, the production presented the country with a specially built Mars rover model that had been constructed for use during filming. This rover prop was not simply discarded or stored away after production wrapped. Instead, it found a permanent home as an exhibit piece in Jordan's Royal Automobile Museum, where it continues to be displayed. Beyond the purely logistical and physical elements of production, considerable creative attention was paid to questions of tone and characterization, particularly regarding the central performance and how to depict Watney's psychological state throughout his ordeal. In adapting the novel, Andy Weir had made a deliberate choice in his original text to avoid portraying Watney as overwhelmingly lonely or depressed despite his dire circumstances. Instead, the character's resilience and dark sense of humor became one of the novel's defining and most beloved qualities. The film adaptation preserved this essential characteristic of Watney's humor, retaining much of the wit that readers had responded to so strongly in the source material. At the same time, Scott made the choice to visually emphasize Watney's isolation through cinematography that captured the sheer scale and emptiness of the dusty Martian landscape surrounding him. using the vastness of the environment itself as a way of communicating the character's solitude even when the dialogue and internal monologue remain comedic in tone. This combination of preserved humor alongside visual emphasis and isolation drew specific praise from critics who reviewed the finished film. Todd McCarthy, writing for The Hollywood Reporter, specifically noted how the scenes set on Earth functioned as a deliberate counterweight to the Martian sequences, creating a contrast between the hectic, densely populated environments of Mission Control and the general public response on Earth versus the stark aridity of the Martian exteriors, which McCarthy felt were magnificently rendered through the choice to shoot in the vicinity of Wadi Rum in Jordan. In discussing his own preparation and performance, Matt Damon revealed an important reference point that influenced both his approach to the role and, by extension, Scott's direction of the survival elements of the story. Damon explained that he and Scott drew inspiration from the 2003 documentary film Touching the Void, which told the harrowing real-life story of mountain climbers who became trapped and had to survive against overwhelming odds in an unforgiving, isolated environment. This reference point suggests that the filmmakers were consciously thinking about The Martian not purely as a science fiction spectacle but as a survival narrative in the tradition of stories about human endurance against the elements, with the Martian setting functioning as an extreme, almost archetypal version of the kind of remote, hostile wilderness that has long fascinated audiences in survival stories. Scott himself revealed an interesting evolution in his own thinking about how to portray Watney's isolation. He initially conceived of approaching the character through the lens of Robinson Crusoe, the classic literary archetype of a person stranded alone, cut off entirely from civilization and human contact, left to fend for themselves through ingenuity and resourcefulness. However, as production developed, Scott came to recognize that this framing did not entirely fit the specific circumstances of Watney's situation. Unlike Crusoe, who exists in genuine isolation with no audience or observer, Watney's situation involves an additional layer of self-awareness. He is constantly being recorded by the various cameras mounted throughout the habitat and his equipment for mission documentation purposes. This meant that Watney, even in his isolation, would have been continuously monitoring and adjusting his own behavior with the knowledge that he was being filmed, creating a more self-conscious, performative quality to his isolation that distinguishes the character from a purely Crusoe-like figure cut off from any form of observation. This nuance ended up shaping how the character's video diary sequences were conceived and performed, lending them a quality of someone who is aware they are creating a record for posterity even as they grapple privately with fear and uncertainty. Regarding the overall length and structure of the finished film, Scott has stated that the very first assembled cut of The Martian ran approximately 2 hours and 45 minutes. Considerably longer than the version that would eventually be released theatrically. This initial cut would have undergone substantial trimming during the post-production editing process to arrive at the leaner theatrical running time. Notably, an extended cut of the film was later released for home video audiences, restoring some of the material that had been trimmed from the theatrical version, giving fans an opportunity to see a version of the story closer to that initial, longer assembly. One of the most distinctive and heavily publicized aspects of the film's production was the extensive collaboration between the filmmakers and NASA, the United States Real-World Space Agency. This relationship had actually begun before the film was even in active development, originating instead with the original novel, when Ware's book was first published and began gaining traction. NASA extended an invitation to the author to tour both the Johnson Space Center and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, exposing him directly to the real facilities, personnel, and equipment that inform realistic depictions of human spaceflight. This early relationships between Ware and NASA set a precedent that would carry forward into the film production itself. When Scott began preparing to direct the adaptation, Ware reached out to NASA once again, this time specifically to facilitate collaboration on the film version of the story. Around the same period, when Scott and producer Mark Watney held their first production meeting devoted to the project, they placed the call directly to NASA and spoke with Bert Ulrich, the agency's film and television liaison, a role specifically created to manage NASA's relationships with entertainment productions seeking technical assistance or cooperation. NASA's decision to commit resources and personnel to helping the filmmakers depict the science and technology featured in the story was rooted in the agency's recognition that the film represented a significant opportunity to promote public interest in and support for space exploration, particularly the prospect of eventual human missions to Mars, a long-term goal the agency has pursued across multiple presidential administrations. The roster of NASA personnel who became involved in supporting the production was substantial and included senior figures within the agency. James L. Green, who served as director of the Planetary Science Division, and Dave Lavery, the program executive for solar system exploration, were among the key NASA staff members who joined the collaborative effort. Scott himself spoke directly with Green on at least 2 separate occasions before filming commenced, using these conversations to extract detailed information that would inform the film's depiction of various technologies and procedures. Over the course of roughly 1 month, NASA fielded hundreds of individual questions from the production team covering an enormous range of technical subjects, including the functioning of radioisotope power systems, plausible designs for the surface habitats that future Mars astronauts might actually use, and numerous other points of technical detail. These questions were either answered directly by Green or routed to the appropriate specialist within the agency's vast network of engineers and scientists, with the answers then funneled back to Scott's production team so that the information could be incorporated into the script, set design, and visual effects. Beyond simply answering questions, NASA's contribution extended to providing the production with hundreds of authentic photographs, including real images of the Martian surface captured by the agency's various orbiters and rovers, as well as detailed reference photography of actual control center environments, down to granular details like the specific appearance of computer screens and interface designs used by real NASA personnel. This wealth of authentic visual reference material gave the production design team an unusually rich foundation from which to construct their fictionalized but grounded depiction of both the Martian environment and Earth-based mission control facilities. Green also played a direct role in facilitating access for key members of the production design team. He arranged for production designer Arthur Max to receive an extensive 8-hour tour of the Johnson Space Center in Houston, during which Max had the opportunity to meet with various NASA specialists and capture hundreds of photographs for reference purposes. This hands-on access to the actual physical spaces and personnel involved in American human spaceflight operations gave Max direct, first-hand material to draw upon as he designed the film's various sets. Interestingly, despite this extensive access to the real facilities, the production design ultimately diverged somewhat from strict realism in its depiction of NASA's mission control. Max and his team created a futuristic, heavily modernized vision of mission control specifically for the film, constructed as a studio set. This stylized depiction drew commentary from the technology publication Ars Technica, which described the film's version of mission control as essentially representing an idealized vision, the kind of space agency facility that audiences might dream of seeing, in pointed contrast to the considerably more utilitarian and aging appearance of the actual Johnson Space Center, which the publication characterized as resembling a run-down college campus rather than the sleek, high-tech environment depicted on screen. The scope and depth of NASA's involvement with the production was unusual even by the standards of space-themed Hollywood films, a point underscored by coverage from Newsweek, which reported that staff members from numerous different departments within NASA had consulted on the film across the entire production timeline, from the earliest stages of script development all the way through principal photography, and that the agency continued assisting with promotional and marketing efforts timed to coincide with the film's theatrical release. This collaborative spirit produced some genuinely unusual crossover moments between the fictional production and real-world space activities. As one particularly notable element of the partnership, the production's NASA liaison arranged to have the front page of the film's screenplay included as part of the payload carried aboard the Orion spacecraft during its exploration flight Test 1 mission, which launched on December 5, 2014. This meant that a physical page from the script for a fictional Mars survival story was literally sent into space as part of a genuine NASA test flight, a symbolic gesture that captured just how intertwined the film production and the real space agency's activities had become during this period. The broader scientific and space exploration community closely watched the development of the film with considerable anticipation, recognizing its potential to serve as a powerful tool for raising public awareness and support. According to reporting from the Los Angeles Times, NASA and the wider scientific community viewed the film as an opportunity to generate public enthusiasm for the prospect of eventual human missions to Mars, a goal that has remained a consistent, if often distant, aspiration within American space policy. The New York Times offered a particularly pointed observation about the mutually beneficial relationships between the film and the space agency, noting that the film effectively functioned as favorable publicity for NASA, with the agency reciprocating by actively promoting the film through its own official website and channels. The timing of certain real-world scientific announcements added an almost uncanny layer of synchronicity to this mutually reinforcing publicity relationship. Just days before the film's American theatrical release, NASA scientists announced findings suggesting that signs of liquid water could be observed in photographs of the Martian surface captured by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. The New York Times pointedly noted the suspicious timing of this announcement, suggesting it demonstrated that NASA had clearly mastered the art of cross-promotional timing, releasing scientifically significant findings about the very planet at the center of the film's narrative just as audiences were preparing to flock to theaters. Jim Erickson, a NASA project manager who was involved in the collaboration, articulated one of the agency's central hopes for what the film might accomplish in terms of public perception. He expressed the view that the film would help illustrate for moviegoers both the substantial risks and the potential rewards associated with sending human beings to Mars, framing the film's dramatic narrative as a useful vehicle for communicating the genuine stakes involved in such an ambitious undertaking. Beyond the more abstract and technical language typically used in agency communications, the collaboration between the film and the space agency continued well beyond the theatrical release itself. In October 2015, shortly after the film opened in American theaters, NASA unveiled a new interactive web tool specifically designed to allow members of the public to follow the fictional character Mark Watney's trek across the Martian surface, essentially using the film's narrative as an entry point to engage audiences with real, mapped Martian terrain. Around the same period, the agency also released additional materials outlining its actual planned next steps toward eventual human Mars exploration, as well as a detailed report addressing the various health hazards that would need to be managed and mitigated in any real-world crewed mission to the Red Planet. This wave of NASA-published material in the immediate aftermath of the film's release demonstrates a deliberate, coordinated strategy on the part of the agency to capitalize on the cultural moment and public attention generated by the film's success to advance broader public understanding of an interest in its own long-term exploration goals. The cultural reach and impact of the film extended even into the highest levels of American government. In 2016, then-President Barack Obama publicly named The Martian as among the best science fiction films he had ever personally seen, a notable endorsement from the sitting head of state that further underscored how thoroughly the film had permeated public discourse, reaching audiences and commentators well beyond the typical movie-going demographic and into political and policy-oriented conversations about the future of American space exploration. Post-production. The post-production phase of The Martian involved the painstaking work of trimming and refining what Scott has described as an initial assembled cut running approximately 2 hours and 45 minutes down to the considerably tighter theatrical version that audiences would eventually see in cinemas. Pietro Scalia served as the film's editor, tasked with the challenging work of finding the right rhythm and pacing for a story that needed to juggle multiple narrative threads simultaneously. Watney's solitary survival efforts on Mars, the increasingly complex rescue planning happening at NASA on Earth, and a parallel storyline following the Hermes crew making their way back toward Earth, unaware for much of the story that their crewmate had survived. Balancing these three distinct narrative spaces, each with its own visual language, pacing, and emotional register, required careful editorial choices about when to cut between them and how much time to devote to each thread at any given point in the story. The decision to ultimately release an extended cut on home video, restoring approximately 10 additional minutes of footage that had been trimmed from the theatrical version, suggests that the post-production team made deliberate choices to streamline the theatrical cut for pacing purposes while still preserving the additional material for release once the constraints of theatrical runtime expectations were no longer as pressing a concern. This extended cut was ultimately released on June 7, 2016, giving audiences who had already seen the theatrical version an opportunity to revisit the story with additional scenes and character moments restored. Music. The musical score for The Martian was composed by Harry Gregson Williams, a composer with substantial prior experience working specifically with director Ridley Scott across multiple previous projects. This assignment marked the fourth collaboration between Gregson Williams and Scott, building on a working relationship that had already produced scores for several of Scott's earlier films. Gregson Williams had previously contributed music to Scott's 2005 film Kingdom of Heaven, his 2012 science fiction film Prometheus, and Exodus, Gods and Kings. Notably, the nature of his involvement varied across these different projects. For Kingdom of Heaven and for The Martian itself, Gregson Williams composed the main film score, while for Prometheus and Exodus, Gods and Kings, his contributions took the form of additional music supplementing scores primarily composed by other artists. This pattern suggests that, by the time The Martian went into production, Gregson Williams had earned a level of trust with Scott sufficient for him to be entrusted with composing the film's principal musical identity rather than serving in a more supplementary capacity. Beyond Gregson Williams' original orchestral score, the film features a memorable and recurring needle-drop music element that became one of its most distinctive and frequently discussed creative touches. A running gag established early in the film centers on the personal musical tastes of Commander Melissa Lewis, who has a particular fondness for popular songs from the 1970s, with a special emphasis on the disco genre specifically. This becomes narratively significant because Lewis's personal music collection, left behind on the Martian surface, turns out to be the only music available to Watney during his time stranded on the planet. The joke is compounded by the fact that Watney, apparently, cannot stand disco music, creating a recurring comedic tension throughout the film as he is forced to endure a genre he actively dislikes simply because it is the only musical option available to him in his isolation. This music functions for much of the film as diegetic sound, meaning it exists within the actual world of the story as music that Watney himself is actually playing and listening to, rather than functioning purely as a non-diegetic score added for the audience's benefit alone. The soundtrack assembled for the film draws specifically from this 1970s disco and soul tradition, and includes several recognizable period tracks. Among the songs featured are Turn the Beat Around by Vicky Sue Robinson, Hot Stuff by Donna Summer, Rock the Boat by the Hughes Corporation, Don't Leave Me This Way by Thelma Houston, Starman by David Bowie, Waterloo by ABBA, and Love Train by the OJs. Additionally, I Will Survive by Gloria Gaynor appears specifically during the film's closing credits, serving as the exit music that plays as audiences leave the theater. The selection of these particular tracks, especially the placement of both Don't Leave Me This Way and I Will Survive within the film's concluding moments, has been understood by commentators as a deliberate, knowing piece of musical commentary on Watney's overall situation and journey. Both songs carry thematic content related to survival, endurance, and emerging from difficult circumstances, making their inclusion feel less like an arbitrary period soundtrack choice and more like a pointed, somewhat playful editorial wink acknowledging the broader themes of the narrative the audience has just watched unfold. The choice to lean into the survival and perseverance themes embedded in disco-era hits, rather than using more somber or dramatic musical cues for these emotional beats, reinforces the film's overall tonal commitment to maintaining humor and lightness even while depicting genuinely harrowing circumstances. Released theatrical, The Martian made its world premiere at the 2015 Toronto International Film Festival on September 11, 2015, a launching point that gave the film significant early visibility among critics. industry professionals, and festival audiences well ahead of its wider commercial release. Following this festival debut, the film continued to build anticipation through additional limited screenings in the weeks leading up to its full theatrical rollout. It screened as part of a sneak preview at the New York Film Festival on September 27, 2015, giving another influential audience segment an early look at the finished film. Just 2 days later, on September 29, 2015, the film also screened at Fantastic Fest in Austin, Texas, a festival particularly known for its enthusiastic genre film audience, making it a fitting additional stop for a science fiction film hoping to build word-of-mouth momentum among genre enthusiasts ahead of wide release. In terms of its formal theatrical rollout to general audiences, the film opened in the United Kingdom on September 30, 2015. Notably on a Wednesday rather than the more traditional Friday opening day. The American release followed shortly after, with the film opening in the United States on Friday, October 2, 2015. The film was made available across a range of exhibition formats designed to maximize its potential as a theatrical event, including standard 2D presentations, 3D screenings, IMAX 3D presentations, and 4DX format screenings, which incorporate motion and environmental effects synchronized to the on-screen action. The film was also released utilizing the Dolby Vision format within Dolby Cinema venues throughout North America, giving audiences in those specific theaters access to an enhanced visual presentation taking advantage of Dolby's expanded color and contrast capabilities. The film's international rollout extended well beyond its initial UK and US openings. It was released across 49 additional markets, including Mexico, Hong Kong, India, and Taiwan, during the same opening weekend window of October 2 through 4. 2015. The rollout then continued to expand in subsequent weeks, reaching Germany, Russia, and South Korea the following weekend. Spain received the film on October 16, while France followed on October 21. China represented a notably later addition to the release calendar, with the film opening there on November 25, several weeks after most other major markets had already received it. Japan represented an even later addition, with the film not opening there until February 5, 2016, well into the first quarter of the following year and several months after its initial festival premiere and most other major territorial releases. Industry analysts and trade publications devoted considerable attention to forecasting and analyzing the film's anticipated box office performance well before its actual release, approximately 2 months ahead of the theatrical opening. The trade publication Box Office issued a forecast projecting that the film would gross around $46 million during its opening weekend specifically within the United States, with an ultimate projected total of approximately $172 million across its entire domestic theatrical run. In assembling this forecast, the publication identified several factors it considered favorable for the film's commercial prospects. These included a continued strong sales performance of Weir's original novel, which suggested a built-in audience of readers already familiar with and invested in the story, Scott's established track record of success directing previous science fiction films, and the broader positive critical and commercial reception that had greeted other recent space-themed films, specifically citing both Gravity from 2013 and Interstellar from 2014 as evidence that audiences had a current appetite for ambitious, scientifically grounded space dramas. The same forecast also identified countervailing negative factors that could potentially limit the film's box office potential. These included concerns that Matt Damon, despite his significant star power and extensive filmography, had not always proven to be a reliable consistent draw at the box office across all of his projects. Additionally, the strong critical and commercial performance of Gravity and Interstellar had arguably set an unusually high bar of audience expectation for any subsequent space-themed film, creating pressure for The Martian to match or exceed those benchmarks. The forecast also pointed to Ridley Scott's previous film, the historical epic Exodus, Gods and Kings, released in 2014, characterizing that earlier project as something of a stumble for the director, raising at least some question about whether Scott was currently operating at the peak of his commercial and critical form heading into this new project. As the release date drew closer, more specific pre-release tracking data became available. Approximately 1 week before the film's release, box office tracking conducted across North America, encompassing both the United States and Canada, indicated that the film was on pace to earn somewhere between $40 million and $50 million during its opening weekend, playing across 3,826 theaters. Comparisons to other recent space-themed films provided useful context for understanding where industry observers believed The Martian might land commercially. Gravity, which had faced considerably less direct competition from other space-themed films at the time of its own 2013 release, had opened to a better-than-expected $55.8 million. Interstellar, meanwhile, had debuted in November 2014 to an opening weekend gross of $47.5 million. One notable structural disadvantage The Martian faced in comparison to both of these prior films involved access to IMAX screens specifically. Both Gravity and Interstellar had benefited from being able to play in IMAX locations, a format long associated with boosting overall box office returns due to premium ticket pricing and the immersive theatrical experience it offers. The Martian, however, was not initially able to secure IMAX availability, because IMAX screens were committed at the time to an exclusive theatrical run of Robert Zemeckis' The Walk. Despite this limitation regarding IMAX access specifically, the film was still able to secure placement in more than 350 premium large-format theaters more broadly, along with 2,550 specifically 3D-equipped locations, giving it considerable presence across various premium exhibition formats even without the IMAX brand specifically. An additional and somewhat serendipitous factor potentially boosting the film's commercial prospects involved the timing of real-world scientific news. The film's release came just several days after NASA's widely publicized announcement regarding the discovery of evidence suggesting liquid water on the Martian surface, a finding that generated substantial mainstream media coverage and likely helped further heighten public interest and curiosity about Mars specifically at the precise moment the film was opening in theaters. The ticket-selling platform Fandango reported that, based on advanced ticket sales data, The Martian was actually outselling Gravity in the lead-up to release, an encouraging early signal for the film's commercial prospects. Another point of distinction raised by commentators involved how the two films utilized 3D technology differently. Despite having been filmed using 3D cameras, The Martian did not rely on abundant 3D visual spectacle to the same degree that Gravity had, and the film also ran for a notably longer runtime than its 2013 predecessor. When the film's actual box office results began rolling in, they confirmed the optimistic pre-release indicators. On its opening day in North America, Friday, October 2, 2015, the film earned $18.06 million, of which approximately $2 million came specifically from premium large-format screenings, across a total of 3,831 theaters. Notably, this Friday total already included $2.5 million generated from late-night Thursday preview screenings, which had taken place across 2,800 theaters the evening before the official wide release. Over its full opening weekend, the film earned $54.3 million from those 3,831 theaters, securing the top position at the North American box office for the weekend. This result placed the film as the second biggest October opening of all time at that point, trailing only Gravity's $55.7 million opening from 2 years prior. Within the context of Ridley Scott's filmography specifically, this opening weekend result ranked as the second largest of his career as a director, behind only the $58 million opening of his 2001 film Hannibal. Similarly, within the context of Matt Damon's career as a leading actor, this result ranked as his second biggest opening weekend, behind only The Bourne Ultimatum, which had opened to $69.2 million. Premium large-format screens contributed meaningfully to these results, with the film earning $6 million specifically from 375 premium large-format screens during the opening weekend. Three-dimensional presentations accounted for a substantial 45% of total ticket sales for the weekend, with ReelSignal 3D screenings specifically responsible for 42% of sales, translating to approximately $23 million in revenue attributable to that particular 3D exhibition technology, representing one of ReelSignal's strongest individual weekend performances across the entirety of 2015. Despite these strong results, the film ultimately fell just short of breaking Gravity's previously established opening weekend record for the month of October, a shortfall that some industry analysts attributed to several external factors competing for audience attention that particular weekend, including the presence of Hurricane Joaquin, ongoing competition from the National Football League season, and the fact that the weekend coincided with the final day of the Major League Baseball regular season. The film demonstrated strong continued performance in its second weekend of release, experiencing a relatively modest decline of 31.9% from its opening weekend total, earning $37 million from a slightly expanded base of 3,854 theaters, representing an increase of 23 theaters compared to the prior weekend. This result allowed the film to maintain its position at the top of the domestic box office for a second consecutive weekend. Audience demographic data gathered during this second weekend remain largely consistent with patterns observed during the opening weekend, with the audience composition skewing 52% male and 72% over the age of 25, suggesting the film was drawing a somewhat older, balanced gender audience rather than skewing heavily toward younger male moviegoers, a pattern that aligns with the film's more cerebral, science-focused approach to its science fiction premise rather than leaning into action-oriented spectacle. The film's run at the top of the domestic box office continued for 2 consecutive weekends before it was finally dethroned in its third weekend of release by the horror comedy film Goosebumps, which narrowly edged out The Martian in what proved to be a tight race between the two films, with Goosebumps earning $23.6 million compared to The Martian's $21.3 million that particular weekend. However, The Martian's box office strength proved durable rather than fleeting, as the film managed to return to the top position at the domestic box office for a third time during its fourth weekend of release. Ultimately, the film topped the domestic box office across 4 separate, non-consecutive weekends throughout its theatrical run, before finally being overtaken for good by the James Bond film Spectre during its 5th weekend in release. A particularly significant career milestone occurred on November 5, when The Martian surpassed the $187.7 million domestic total previously earned by Gladiator, thereby becoming Ridley Scott's highest-grossing film at the domestic box office across his entire directing career up to that point, a notable achievement given the breadth and acclaim of Scott's extensive filmography spanning multiple decades. Beyond North America, The Martian enjoyed a robust and extensive international release, ultimately reaching a total of 81 countries worldwide over the course of its theatrical run. Outside of North America, the film opened during the same general weekend window across 54 different markets, generating $44.6 million from 9,299 screens internationally, a result strong enough to claim the top position at the international box office for that weekend and to debut at the number 1 position in more than 15 individual markets. The following weekend, the film's international footprint expanded further still, adding 23 additional markets and generating an estimated $57.5 million from a total of 77 markets, now playing across 12,859 screens internationally. Several individual international markets stood out for producing particularly strong opening weekend results. South Korea generated $12.5 million during its opening weekend, a result notable enough to merit separate mention as one of the film's standout international performances. The combined market of the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Malta produced $10.2 million in opening weekend revenue. Russia and the broader Commonwealth of Independent States region generated $7.4 million. France produced $6.9 million, Australia generated $4.5 million, and Germany produced $4.3 million. though Germany's result placed the film behind the animated film Inside Out in that particular market that weekend. Looking at cumulative total earnings rather than simply opening weekend results, several markets emerged as the film's strongest overall international performers. The United Kingdom proved to be the single strongest international market in terms of the total cumulative box office, generating $35.3 million across its full theatrical run there. South Korea followed closely behind with $33.6 million in total earnings, while Australia generated $16.57 million and Germany produced $16 million in cumulative totals. South Korea's performance was particularly noteworthy within the context of 20th Century Fox's own distribution history in that specific market, as The Martian became the studio's third highest-grossing film of all time in South Korea, trailing only behind Avatar from 2009 and Kingsman: The Secret Service, which had also been released earlier in 2015. The film's South Korean opening carried additional significance beyond simply its raw box office figures. The opening took place during the 3-day Hangul Day holiday period, a national holiday in South Korea, and the film generated almost $12.5 million from approximately 1.81 million admissions over a 4-day period. This result represented Ridley Scott's highest opening film ever in the South Korean market, surpassing the previous high mark set by his 2010 film Robin Hood, which had grossed $10.2 million from 1.6 million admissions in that market. Additionally, this result represented 20th Century Fox's single biggest opening weekend of all time in the South Korean market across the studio's entire history of releases there, and stood as the biggest October opening ever recorded in that market specifically. Internationally, the film maintained its position atop the international box office for 2 consecutive weekends before being overtaken in its third international weekend by the Marvel superhero film Ant-Man. However, similar to its pattern in North America, the film demonstrated resilience and returned to the top international box office position during its 4th weekend of release internationally. The film's run at the top of the international box office, taken in total across its non-consecutive weeks at number 1, ultimately spanned 3 separate weekends before the James Bond film Spectre once again proved to be the film that finally and permanently displaced it from the top position, mirroring the pattern of Spectre eventually overtaking The Martian domestically as well. China represented one of the later, but ultimately highly significant, markets in the film's international rollout. The film opened there on Wednesday, November 25, and generated an impressive $50 million during its 5-day opening weekend window, playing across 4,848 screens, of which $6.6 million specifically came from 249 IMAX theaters within that total. The film's performance in China did show a notably steep decline in its second weekend there, falling by 60% to generate $13.7 million. Despite this significant weekend-to-weekend drop, the film's cumulative total gross within the Chinese market ultimately reached $95 million, representing a substantial contribution to the film's overall worldwide total. Japan, as previously noted, represented the latest major market addition to the film's international rollout, with the release not occurring until February 5, 2016. Notably, the film was released in Japan under a different title, Odyssey, rather than retaining the English-language title used in most other markets, a localization choice presumably made to better resonate with Japanese audiences or to avoid potential naming conflicts or associations within that specific market. Despite arriving several months after most other major territories had already received the film, the Japanese release performed strongly, generating $5.2 million from 8,333 screens during its 3-day opening weekend, a result strong enough to secure the number 1 position at the Japanese box office and to help push the film's cumulative worldwide total past the significant $600 million milestone of that opening weekend total. The Saturday and Sunday portion specifically accounted for $4.25 million. The film demonstrated unusually strong legs in the Japanese market, declining by just 19% in its second weekend there while still adding $3.4 million in additional revenue. The film maintained its position at the top of the Japanese box office for 4 consecutive weekends, and by February 28, had accumulated a total of $23.2 million within that specific market alone. Some additional scheduling and strategic decisions made by the studio prior to release are worth noting as part of the broader theatrical release story. For its United States release specifically, the film had originally been scheduled to open on November 25, 2015, placing it during the Thanksgiving holiday period, traditionally a major movie-going weekend. However, 20th Century Fox ultimately made the decision to switch release dates with another of its films, Victor Frankenstein, repositioning The Martian to instead become the studio's first wide release intended for all audiences during the broader fall season window spanning September through November, rather than holding it specifically for the Thanksgiving corridor. The film's use of 3D technology also attracted commentary from industry figures with a specific stake in that particular exhibition format. Anthony Markley, who served as chief executive of ReelSignal, the 3D technology and exhibition company, offered observations about broader industry trends regarding where and how 3D technology was being deployed. Markley noted that 3D technology was increasingly proliferating beyond its traditional association with action-heavy summer blockbuster releases, instead finding new application in more immersive forms of dramatic storytelling. He specifically cited both The Martian and The Walk, Robert Zemeckis' film about tightrope walker Philip Petty, which was released the same year, as 2 prominent examples of this broader trend toward using 3D technology in service of immersive narrative experiences rather than purely spectacle-driven action sequences. Home media. Following the conclusion of its theatrical run, The Martian transitioned to home media release across multiple formats and platforms over the following months. The film became available for digital purchase and rental on December 22, 2015. Providing an early home viewing option for audiences who had perhaps missed the theatrical window or who simply preferred to revisit the film from home shortly after the holiday season. Following the digital release, the film arrived on physical media formats somewhat later, with both Blu-ray and standard DVD releases occurring on January 12, 2016. For audiences seeking the highest possible home video quality, a 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray edition followed shortly after, releasing on February 14, 2016, giving the film a premium physical media option that took advantage of then emerging 4K display technology and the enhanced detail and color range that format offered compared to standard Blu-ray. Beyond these standard home media releases of the theatrical cut, the studio also moved forward with releasing the previously mentioned extended cut of the film, which was toward approximately 10 minutes of additional footage that had not been included in the theatrical version. This extended cut arrived on home video on June 7, 2016, considerably later than the initial home media releases, giving the studio an opportunity to generate a second wave of consumer interest and purchases from fans eager to see additional material, well after the initial home video release window had already passed. This staggered release strategy, offering the standard cut first and following up months later with an extended version, is a pattern that has become relatively common within the home entertainment industry as a way of maximizing the commercial lifespan and revenue potential of a successful theatrical release across multiple discrete purchasing opportunities. Reception. Box office. The Martian proved to be a substantial financial success for 20th Century Fox, generating returns that comfortably exceeded its production budget across its worldwide theatrical run. In total, the film grossed $228.4 million across the United States and Canada combined, and an additional $402.2 million across all other international territories, for a combined worldwide total of $630.6 million. This result stands in clear contrast to the film's production budget of $108 million, indicating a strong return on the studio's initial investment even before accounting for marketing and distribution expenses. which for a film of this scale and global rollout would typically represent a substantial additional cost on top of the production budget itself. This worldwide total was sufficient to position The Martian as the 10th highest-grossing film released globally during the calendar year 2015. A particularly impressive placement given the unusually competitive nature of that specific release year, which saw numerous major blockbuster franchise films compete for audience attention and box office dollars. Industry analysts who specialize in calculating the true profitability of major studio releases, accounting for the full range of costs and revenue streams involved beyond simply theatrical box office grosses, offered varying assessments of the film's actual net financial performance. Deadline Hollywood conducted its own detailed profitability analysis and calculated the film's net profit at $150.32 million. This figure was derived by accounting for the full production budget, prints and advertising costs associated with marketing and distributing the film, talent participation arrangements that would have entitled certain cast and crew members to a share of profits, various other associated costs, and then weighing all of these expenses against the film's theatrical box office grosses combined with additional ancillary revenue streams generated through home media sales and rentals. Based on this comprehensive analysis, Deadline Hollywood placed The Martian in the 10th position on its annual list ranking 2015's most valuable blockbusters, a ranking specifically designed to assess true profitability rather than simply raw box office totals. The Hollywood Reporter conducted a separate analysis and arrived at a somewhat different estimate, reporting that the film likely generated profits in the range of approximately $80 million to $100 million, a figure that, while different from Deadline's specific calculation, still confirms the broader picture of the film as a genuinely and substantially profitable release for the studio. Critical response to Martian was met with strong critical acclaim upon its release, a reception reflected clearly across the major aggregator platforms that track and compile professional film criticism. On Rotten Tomatoes, the review aggregation website, the film achieved a positive rating from 91% of 384 surveyed critics, with an average rating of 7.9 out of 10 among those reviews. The website's official critics' consensus summary characterized the film as smart, thrilling, and surprisingly funny, further noting that it offered a faithful adaptation of the best-selling source novel while bringing out particularly strong work from both leading man Matt Damon and director Ridley Scott. On Metacritic, a separate aggregator that calculates a weighted average score based on the reviews it compiles, the film received a score of 80 out of 100, based on an aggregate of 46 individual critic reviews, a result that the platform's own classification system characterizes as indicating generally favorable reviews overall. Beyond professional critical reception, general audience response to the film was tracked through several additional measurement systems. Audiences surveyed by CinemaScore, a research firm that polls opening night moviegoers immediately after they exit theatrical screenings, awarded the film an average grade of A on the firm's letter grade scale, which runs from A+ down to F. Separately, the post-track audience research service reported that surveyed filmgoers gave the film an average rating of 4.5 out of a possible 5, with 66% of those surveyed indicating they would definitely recommend the film to others. The demographic breakdown of audiences captured through this particular research showed a composition of 54% men, alongside a total of 59% of the audience being over the age of 35, again reinforcing the pattern noted earlier of the film appealing to a relatively mature audience demographic rather than skewing heavily toward younger viewers. Drilling down into the specific substance of individual critical reviews reveals a broadly consistent set of praised elements across many different publications and critics. According to the consensus characterization compiled by Rotten Tomatoes, critics generally felt that the film found director Scott exploring more hopeful creative territory than some of his other work, with the overall result being characterized as an awe-inspiring adventure that successfully explored large, ambitious ideas while still remaining firmly grounded in very human, relatable emotional territory. The consensus further characterized the film as visually stunning and scientifically credible, while also being immensely likable, an appeal that critics attributed in significant part to Damon's performance, which was described as both funny and touching in its emotional register. Variety offered its own summary characterization of the broader critical conversation surrounding the film, reporting that critics were generally describing the film as a funny, thrilling ride, and further characterizing it as representing something of a return to form for Ridley Scott specifically, following what the publication characterized as the comparatively weaker reception that had greeted his two immediately preceding films, The Counselor and Exodus, Gods and Kings, both of which had landed with less critical and commercial success than Scott's most acclaimed work. An unusually authoritative voice weighed in on the film's scientific credibility, specifically through a piece published in The Guardian. Robert Zubrin, an aerospace engineer with particular expertise and a long-standing public advocacy history regarding the prospect of Mars colonization, offered detailed commentary on the film's scientific accuracy and its place within the broader tradition of films set on Mars. Zubrin characterized the film as representing the first genuine Mars movie, distinguishing it from previous Mars-set films by noting that it was the first such film that genuinely attempted realism and that was substantively about human beings grappling directly with the actual problems and challenges involved in exploring Mars, in pointed contrast to other films set on the planet that had largely functioned either as action-oriented shoot-'em-ups or as horror films using the Martian setting merely as exotic backdrop. Zubrin praised the film specifically for declining to engage in fantasy elements, noting approvingly that it included no monsters, no magic, and no Nazis, a somewhat pointed reference to the kinds of outlandish plot devices that had populated earlier science fiction films set on Mars. However, Zubrin's assessment was not entirely uncritical. He did note that the film contained a number of specific technical mistakes despite its overall commitment to realism. Manohla Dargis, writing for the New York Times, offered a more thematically and philosophically oriented reading of the film's significance. She characterized the film as involving a dual journey simultaneously into outer space and inner psychological space, describing it as a trip that carries the audience into the vast immensity of the universe itself while also venturing deeply into the equally vast internal landscape of a single human consciousness grappling with extraordinary circumstances. Dargis noted that for the film's central character, an accidental castaway stranded far from home, outer space functions as the literal location of his physical isolation, while simultaneously serving as the space in which his mind paradoxically becomes set free. Dargis further situated this thematic reading within the broader context of Scott's career as a filmmaker, suggesting that the director's great and persistent thematic preoccupation across his body of work concerns the fundamental question of what it actually means to be human, with The Martian representing another exploration of that recurring directorial interest. Not all critical response to the film was uniformly positive, however, and several notable dissenting voices offered more critical assessments, generally focusing their objections on perceived shortcomings in character depth and overall atmospheric quality. Jaime and Chrisley, writing for Slant magazine, articulated a critique centered on the film's handling of texture and character behavior, suggesting that while the film gestured toward incorporating these elements, it ultimately lacked genuine conviction in its execution and made no real effort toward achieving meaningful eccentricity or specificity in its characterizations. Chrisley argued that the film seemed to show little genuine interest in its characters as individuals or in offering any substantive depiction of the actual texture of their work, settling instead for what he characterized as broad character types and generic categories of scenes, correctly sequenced according to the dramatic rhythm of Watney's journey but lacking deeper specificity or texture. Stephanie Zacharek, writing for The Village Voice, offered a related but distinctly framed critique, suggesting that the actors in the film were essentially treated as accessories to the larger production rather than as the central focus of genuine character-driven drama. She further characterized Scott's directorial approach to the film's scientific content as workmanlike, observing that the film consistently prioritized scientific accuracy and procedural realism over any sense of magic or wonder, which she identified as precisely the film's intended point and thematic thrust. However, Zacharek questioned whether this approach ultimately served the material well, posing the rhetorical question of what value there is in a space-set story if audiences cannot be made to feel a genuine sense of wonder at the sheer magnitude and mystery of space itself, suggesting that the film's commitment to grounded realism may have come at the cost of more transcendent emotional or sensory impact. Perhaps the most sharply negative assessment came from J. Olson, writing for the publication Sin Mixtape, who offered a notably harsh evaluation that stood out among the otherwise largely positive critical consensus. Olson characterized the film as representing the most colossally mediocre science fiction movie of the entire decade, arguing that this mediocrity emerged specifically in pursuit of what he characterized as empty backslapping and an overly simplistic, grade school-level celebration of science. Olson drew a particularly pointed and unfavorable comparison between The Martian and two films widely regarded as among Scott's genuine masterpieces, Alien and Blade Runner, asserting bluntly that The Martian was not merely in a different class from those two films but existed, in his framing, on an entirely different continent altogether in terms of artistic achievement. The film's critical success translated into a substantial array of formal industry recognition and awards consideration across the subsequent awards season. At the 88th Academy Awards, The Martian received a total of 7 nominations, a haul that included nominations for Best Picture, Best Actor recognizing Matt Damon's central performance, Best Adapted Screenplay recognizing Drew Goddard's work translating Weir's novel, Best Production Design recognizing the extensive work of Arthur Max and his team, Best Sound Editing, Best Sound Mixing, and Best Visual Effects. Beyond the Academy Awards specifically, the film accumulated nominations and wins across numerous other major awards bodies during the 2015 to 2016 awards season. It received 6 nominations at the British Academy Film Awards, reflecting strong recognition from the British film industry's own equivalent of the Oscars. The film also earned 9 nominations at the Critics' Choice Movie Awards, an unusually high total reflecting broad critical enthusiasm across multiple categories. At the Golden Globe Awards, the film received 3 nominations and ultimately won 2 of those, representing one of the stronger award outcomes the film achieved relative to its number of nominations in a given ceremony. The National Board of Review recognized the film with 4 separate awards, and the American Film Institute named it one of the top 10 films of the year 2015, placing it among an elite group of films singled out by that organization for particular distinction. The film's cultural impact extended into an unexpected scientific arena as well. A species of bush tomato native to Australia was given the scientific name Solanum watneyi, an explicit honorific tribute to the character of Mark Watney, specifically chosen to honor his fictional portrayal as a heroic botanist who manages to survive his ordeal in significant part through his agricultural ingenuity. This naming carries an additional layer of thematic resonance given that the newly named plant species belongs to the same broader genus, Solanum, as the potato, the very crop that forms the centerpiece of Watney's survival strategy within the film's narrative. The film's critical standing has also demonstrated notable durability in the years following its initial release, suggesting that its reputation has not simply faded as a product of its specific moment but has instead persisted as part of the broader ongoing conversation about significant films of its era. In 2025, a full decade after its original release, The Martian was included among the films voted for inclusion in a Reader's Choice edition of a notable list compiled by the New York Times ranking what it characterized as the 100 best movies of the 21st century, with the film ultimately finishing at the 174th position on that particular ranking. A significant and recurring thread running throughout much of the film's critical discussion and broader public reception concerned the question of scientific accuracy, an area where the film was repeatedly held up for both praise and pointed critique by individuals with genuine scientific expertise. This emphasis traces back to the source material itself. When Andy Weir originally wrote the novel, he made a concerted effort to present the underlying science as correctly as possible, actively using extensive reader feedback throughout the writing process to identify and correct errors and improve the overall plausibility of the technical content woven throughout the story. This same commitment to scientific plausibility carried forward into the film adaptation under Scott's direction, with the director similarly seeking to ground the film's depiction of space exploration and survival technology in genuine realism, receiving substantial assistance in this effort from James L. Green, the NASA director of the Planetary Science Division within the agency's Science Mission Directorate, whose broader collaborative role in supporting the production has already been discussed. Green assembled dedicated teams of specialists specifically tasked with answering the wide range of scientific questions that Scott and his production team raised throughout the development and filming process. Green's own retrospective assessment of the finished film's scientific accuracy was generally positive but included specific, notable caveats. He characterized the film overall as being reasonably realistic in its depiction of the underlying science and technology. However, he did identify one particularly significant point of scientific inaccuracy regarding the film's inciting incident: the severe dust storm that strands Watney on the planet and sets the entire narrative in motion. While the film depicts this storm as reaching wind speeds of 120 miles per hour, or approximately 190 kilometers per hour, Green noted that in the considerably thinner Martian atmosphere, winds of this velocity would in actual physical reality exert only weak force, nowhere near sufficient to cause the kind of dramatic, life-threatening debris impacts and evacuation crisis depicted in the film's opening sequence. Green additionally offered a more aesthetic observation regarding the film's depiction of NASA's physical facilities, noting that the buildings depicted in the film are considerably more stylish and visually striking than the genuinely functional, utilitarian architecture that NASA actually uses for its real facilities, a point that aligns with the previously discussed observation from Mars Technica regarding the stylized, idealized nature of the film's mission control set design. This particular point regarding the unrealistic force of the film's central dust storm was picked up and repeated by numerous film critics in their own published reviews, with multiple critics specifically noting that, in physical reality, the kind of Martian wind speeds depicted in the film would amount to barely more than a light breeze rather than the violent, debris-hurling force shown on screen. Screenwriter Drew Goddard, when confronted with this specific scientific critique, did not attempt to dispute or defend the accuracy of this particular plot element. Instead, he candidly acknowledged that the depicted wind speeds and their dramatic effects had to be considerably exaggerated beyond what would be physically realistic, explaining that this exaggeration was a necessary narrative device required to plausibly set up the entire situation that sets the broader story in motion, essentially treating this specific inaccuracy as a deliberate and acknowledged dramatic license rather than an oversight or error. Beyond the dust storm controversy, other specific elements of the film's depicted science attracted detailed scrutiny and commentary from critics and scientific commentators alike. The process depicted in the film by which Watney manages to produce water using available materials and resources was generally assessed as chemically accurate and theoretically achievable using real, established chemistry. Similarly, the film's depiction and use of a radioisotope thermoelectric generator, deployed within the story specifically as a heat source, was also assessed as an appropriate and scientifically grounded application of that particular real-world technology. The film's depiction of Watney's potato garden, constructed using Martian soil supplemented with fertilizer derived from the crew's own waste, drew particular attention from the scientific community, in part because subsequent real-world scientific research conducted after the film's release complicated the premise somewhat. Martian soil has since been discovered through actual scientific study to be toxic to both plant life and animal life, a finding that came after the film's release and therefore could not have been incorporated into its narrative at the time of production. It is worth noting, however, that scientific consensus continues to hold that microbial organisms may potentially possess the capability to survive on Mars despite this soil toxicity affecting more complex plant and animal life. leaving some forms of biological possibility on the planet still scientifically plausible even as the specific premise of Watney's potato garden has become harder to defend in light of subsequent research. Jeffrey Kluger, writing for Time magazine, offered specific technical criticism regarding one particular sequence depicting a repair Watney makes using improvised materials. Kluger specifically critiqued the depiction of a scene in which a pressure leak causes an entire section of Watney's habitat to explosively blow apart, after which the character patches the resulting large opening in the damaged structure using nothing more than plastic tarp material and ordinary pressure-sensitive adhesive duct tape. Kluger argued that such a repair would not actually function successfully under the real environmental conditions present on the Martian surface, given that the average Martian surface temperature sits at approximately -60 degrees Celsius, or -76 degrees Fahrenheit, conditions under which standard adhesive tape materials would not maintain the kind of seal integrity necessary to hold a habitat's pressurized environment intact against the near-vacuum conditions outside. The film's handling of Martian gravity specifically also drew commentary, although in this particular instance the relevant departure from strict scientific accuracy appears to have been a conscious and deliberate creative choice made by Scott rather than an oversight. Mars possesses gravity that measures less than 40% of Earth's gravitational pull, a significant difference that, if depicted with complete accuracy, would have required actors to move in a visibly different, lighter manner throughout all of the Martian surface sequences. However, Scott made the explicit decision not to attempt to depict this gravitational difference on screen, reasoning that the practical and technical effort required to convincingly render reduced gravity throughout the film would not be worth the result, particularly when compared to the more dramatically impactful and visually striking choice of depicting full zero gravity during the film sequences set aboard the Hermes spacecraft in transit. Scott further reasoned, in defending this choice, that the heavy spacesuits worn by the characters throughout their time on the Martian surface would realistically impose enough physical weight and restricted movement on the actors that this encumbrance could reasonably be understood as substituting for, or at least partially compensating for, the absence of any visible reduced gravity effect, even though the actual physics of the situation would not necessarily support this particular logic in a strictly scientific sense. In contrast to these various points of criticized inaccuracy, one of the film's most central plot mechanics, the strategy ultimately used to facilitate Watney's eventual rescue, was specifically praised by scientific commentators as being grounded in genuinely sound and well-established real-world space exploration principles. The rescue plan hinges on the technique known as gravity assist, sometimes more colloquially referred to as a slingshot maneuver, in which a spacecraft uses the gravitational pull of a planetary body to alter its trajectory and velocity without expending additional fuel. This is not a speculative or fictional technique invented for the purposes of the story. Rather, it represents a well-established, real-world practice that has been employed across numerous actual robotic planetary exploration missions throughout the history of space exploration, and which had additionally been planned as a viable backup strategy during the crewed Apollo missions to the Moon, should certain contingencies have arisen during those historical flights. Given how well established and fundamental this technique is within actual orbital mechanics and mission planning, commentary on the film's scientific accuracy suggested that a gravity assist maneuver of this kind would have realistically been among the very first rescue approaches that real NASA mission planners would have considered and proposed if confronted with an analogous real-world scenario. The film's broader achievement in successfully balancing scientific plausibility with engaging dramatic storytelling drew praise from figures positioned at the intersection of science communication and science fiction commentary. Ed Finn, who serves as director of the Center for Science and the Imagination at Arizona State University, offered a specific assessment praising what he saw as the film's particular success in imagining a believable near-future scenario, one that, in his assessment, did not push too aggressively far beyond the bounds of current, real technical capability, lending the story a sense of genuine plausibility rather than feeling like a distant speculative fantasy entirely disconnected from present-day technological reality. British physicist Brian Cox offered his own enthusiastic endorsement of the film's value as a piece of science communication and outreach, characterizing it in particularly strong terms as representing the best advertisement for pursuing a career in engineering that he personally had ever seen. A notable statement coming from a prominent public physicist whose own career has substantially involved efforts to popularize and generate public enthusiasm for scientific and engineering pursuits more broadly. It isn't often that the landscape of a motion picture becomes as integral as the acting, writing or direction, but in the newest Ridley Scott, Prometheus, Outer Space Adventure, The Martian, the planet's crimson hues, frozen nights and horrifying sand, dust storms bring the story of an explorer stranded there with little help of survival to full life. This is in no small part due to the work of cinematographer Dariusz Zwolski, Exodus, Gods and Kings, as well as the upcoming The Walk and Company. We often feel the plight of the victim right in the pit of our stomachs. Even the origins of this film are interesting in and of itself. It began as a novel by computer software engineer Andy Weir, but no publishing company seemed interested until he began releasing parts of it on the internet. Soon Crown Publishing came calling and the book became a bestseller. Now 20th Century Fox is bringing out the film, starring Matt Damon, Interstellar, Jessica Chastain, Academy Award nominated for a 0-30, and Jeff Daniels, The Horrible Dumb and Dumber 2, and judging by early box office numbers, the movie is one of the must-sees as Hollywood officially kicks off its award season. Here, a freak, but all too regular, storm seems to have killed botanist Mark Watney, Damon, on the surface of Mars, believing him deceased and under NASA orders to abort the mission. His crew, led by Commander Melissa Lewis, Chastain, blasts off leaving him there. Of course, as one can guess, Watney is very much alive as he was knocked unconscious during the massive Martian gale. After his shock of being injured and abandoned wears off, however, he figures he has enough food and water for less than a year on the red planet. "I've got to science the shit out of this," he intones to himself, and, as a botanist, he finds a way to grow potatoes and soil that seems to be inhospitable. Through clear thinking, problem solving and a little knowledge of chemistry, he even finds a way to produce enough water for him and the crop to survive. Still, he needs to be able to communicate with Earth or the whole point is moot. Realizing that an original Pathfinder communication device from 1997 is buried near the next mission's landing site still exists, he uses the rover to move the satellite system back to his hab. Geek speak for habitat. Meanwhile, NASA, led by Teddy Sanders, Daniels, has officially declared Watney dead and sent him off with the proper honors back home. It comes as quite a shock then when everyone realizes he is still alive. This is especially true of his crew, Lewis, Rick Martinez, Michael Pate +A, Ant-Man, Beth Johansson, Kate Mara, Fantastic Four, Alex Vogel, Axel Henny, Hercules, and Chris Beck, Sebastian Stan, Captain America, the Winter Soldier, who volunteer to postpone their trip home in an effort to return and rescue their comrade. Like the 1995 classic space film, Apollo 13, it's the people behind the scenes who come up with the information and figure out the complex mathematics to bring Watney home. This time, it's a group of Chinese scientists who aid NASA engineers such as Mitch Henderson, Sean Bean, Jupiter Ascending, Vincent Kapoor, Chiwetel Ejiofor, 12 Years a Slave, Minty Park, Mackenzie Davis, That Awkward Moment, and Rich Prennell, Donald Glover, The Lazarus Effect, among others. Call it Revenge of the Nerds, if you like, but it shows the day is not always saved by the fighters. Sometimes the thinkers get their day in the sun, as well. We're told reporters he wanted the book and consequently the movie to be as scientifically accurate as possible. Thus, questions such as how much energy would a Mars rover need to cover the great distances Watney must drive needed answers. And as he found the answers, he also created new problems for his astronaut to surmount. His stranded astronaut has little angst or other motivations. Here, Watney simply pushes forward, putting crises aside and figuring out just how to survive. All in an environment that is barren and unforgiving. We see this as he tries to repair a hole in the hab with plastic covering and duct tape and then sits in fear as a wild Martian wind tries to rip it apart. Even on the brink of rescue, nothing is easy and miscalculations, as well as just plain dumb bad luck, doomed that enterprise. Scott, who flopped with the visually stunning, but soulless Prometheus, nonetheless transformed science fiction cinema with Blade Runner and Alien. He downplays the high drama and overworldly monsters and other threats, and allows Damon to realize the enormity of his plight, the extreme dread that will automatically flow from the vast loneliness of the landscape. With brief exceptions, that is how he plays the character. It's one which is layered and complicated, but very matter-of-fact, and could well provide the actor with his third acting Oscar nomination. As for the overall work, The Martian, like 2013's Gravity, may be one of the smartest picture you will see all year, but it may also be one of the most thrilling and exciting 2+ hours you will spend in the multiplex. Movies adapted from successful books don't always capture the magic of the original text, and the calculation and science-heavy story of The Martian seems a particularly tough customer, but the upcoming film does a surprisingly good job conjuring the book's spirit. The new movie, opening Friday, trades some of the book's non-stop danger for glorious Martian vistas and more NASA at work, and I'm not complaining. As a quick note, this article doesn't spoil major plot points but does discuss the major themes of the book and movie. The movie The Martian is based on Andy Weir's book of the same name, and tells the story of an astronaut who is accidentally left behind on Mars and must struggle to survive. When watching The Martian, all I could think was that the movie version of protagonist Mark Watney had it easy. Sure, almost everything he does goes sideways and presents a new challenge for him to ponder, calculate and build his way out of. But there are a lot of major problems presented in the book that movie Watney doesn't encounter while stranded on Mars, and several complicated, clever solutions he never has to devise. Watch How to Kill, or Save, a Martian. Author Andy Weir knows. Then again, having it easier than book Watney leaves plenty of room for death-defying exploits, and The Martian movie still manages to capture the feel of the book, while making the characters within NASA more vivid and focusing even more on what makes space travel compelling. Weir's novel about an astronaut's fight to stay alive alone on Mars started as a series of chapters posted one by one on his website before he self-published the whole sequence in 2011. In 2014, Crown Publishing released a physical book, and just a year later, 20th Century Fox is releasing a movie. In fact, the two deals were struck within a week of each other. You may like the heart of the novel, and of the new movie, is Watney's log entries, in which he describes the projects he undertakes and conveys his thoughts as he endures his time on the Red Planet. In the movie, the logs become video recordings, but they keep the same tone as the written logs in the book, full of humor and quips despite the dire circumstances. Some of the book's best lines made their way into the movie, and even into the trailers, which I considered a good sign. Those logs, which are essentially a dialogue with the audience, go a long way toward keeping the tight focus on one isolated man interesting in both book and film. But in the movie, Watney shares the screen with another, inescapable character, the Red Planet itself. In the book, Mars reaches out and periodically makes itself known, producing the particular conditions that challenge Watney during his journey. But Mars' constant, giant emptiness, fierce weather and looming landscapes are much more present in the visual medium, where in the book Watney fills up to the audience's view, because readers are only seeing his words. In the movie, Watney is almost always shown at his proper scale in comparison to the vast, isolated planet. Other elements that benefit from the movie treatment are the machinations, collaboration and debate by people within NASA. Although those aspects are included in the book, they don't shine quite as much as Watney's narration. Seeing the personalities on screen, explaining a seemingly impossible spaceship maneuver or digging up old technology to try to rig a solution to a communications problem, makes those scenes much more of a treat. Basically, this movie makes space travel look awesome. It makes it look challenging and dangerous and fallible, and it conveys, perhaps better than the book does, a gut feeling of why space travel is worth doing, and that it's filled with smart people improvising, doing their best with the situation they're in. Read Chapter 1 of The Martian. Those smart solutions are by necessity less detailed in the movie than in the book. Though they seem to be consistent in both the book and the movie, Watney's thought processes, and NASA's, are explained meticulously in the novel, but they are only hinted at on screen. It's a difficult screenwriting challenge to capture the exhilarating moment of solving a problem without the full explanation of how that solution works. Nonetheless, the moments the film does choose to explain more carefully succeed in conveying that feeling. What to read next in an essay by Ware included as the end of the Crown edition of The Martian, entitled How Science Made Me a Writer, Ware discusses the way the actual conditions on Mars, and the fundamental problems they would cause, acted as a base for his storytelling and dictated the course of the story. Science creates plot, Ware wrote. No need for meteor strikes at the surprises, catastrophes, and narrow escapes were coming fast and furious on their own. That drive is carried over into the movie, and so in a basic sense, even if it doesn't match the book challenge for challenge, the movie succeeds at capturing what makes the book so rated PG, Canada, PG-13, MP, for some strong language, injury images and brief nudity. Directed by Ridley Scott, stars Matt Damon, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Michael Pate +A, Jessica Chastain, Jeff Daniels, Sean Bean, Kristen Wiig and Benedict Wong. Runtime, 141 minutes. Respecting life on Mars. Space exploration is dangerous, as Ridley Scott's new sci-fi film, The Martian, illustrates. The movie tells the fictional story of an astronaut, Mark Watney, Matt Damon, left for dead on the surface of Mars during an emergency evacuation of a NASA science mission. The stranded astronaut must then figure out how to survive until the next manned mission to Mars arrives some 4 years in the future. Reminiscent of recent films like Interstellar, 2014, and Gravity, 2013, which also included elements of survival in harsh extraterrestrial environments, The Martian is a cross between Robinson Crusoe and Apollo 13, 1995. When Watney wakes up following his accident, he quickly realizes he's alone on Mars and he has problems: not enough food, not enough water, no communication with NASA, and life support systems that could break down, leaving him with no air. Ingenuity becomes vitally important as he puts to use his scientific knowledge in botany and engineering to solve his problems. When NASA discovers Watney is alive, the world's intellectual, scientific and engineering resources are pushed to the limits to rescue this lone man trapped on Mars. The film's dramatic tension sits on the razor's edge of two questions: will Watney survive Mars, and can they bring him home? Andy Weir's novel, upon which the film is based, is crisp and full of anxious tension, threading the needle of bleak fatalism with a narrow glimmer of hope. Drew Goddard's screenplay, however, is more conventional and in key moments more Hollywood. Goddard was originally slated to direct The Martian, and when he pitched the film to 20th Century Fox he stated his apprehensions about dumbing down the science, explaining, "I don't know how to dumb this down. The science is crucial. It's like a religious movie." In this case, his faith is science, not religion. It's true that Watney and the rest of this story's characters must have faith in their mathematical calculations. However, it is interesting to note that Scott and Goddard have managed to make a film that both keeps a significant amount of the book's hard science while presenting a softer, more congenial view of religion than is found in Weir's novel. Where religion comes up in The Martian, the film favors Christianity. Back on Earth, one of the characters, Vincent Kapoor, Chiwetel Ejiofor, is asked if he believes in God. He responds by saying he's half Hindu, half Baptist. In the book, the character is named Venkat Kapoor and he's fully Hindu. The film's shift to alter the character in a way that includes a Christian identity is interesting, even though in the Kapoor thanks the gods as he does in the book. Watney's character also experiences a shift from book to film as views on faith are transformed from flippant to poignant. Early in the film, in an effort to grow potatoes, Watney needs something to burn to delicately produce water from hydrazine rocket fuel. Because NASA is very keen on not having fires in space, nearly everything at his disposal is non-flammable. Martinez, Michael Pate +A, one of Watney's crewmates, is a devout Roman Catholic, and in the personal items he's left behind is a small wooden crucifix. In the book, Watney dismissively comments, "I chipped his sacred religious item into long splinters using a pair of pliers and a screwdriver. I figured if there's a God, he won't mind, considering the situation I'm in. If ruining the only religious icon I have leaves me open to Martian vampires, I'll have to risk it." In this film, Watney's tone is much more apologetic. He even comments that he's counting on the fact that God won't mind him using the crucifix to try and save his life. This comes across as a genuine hope, implying Watney has some faith that Jesus, the one hanging on the cross, will be both forgiving and merciful. The film doesn't dwell on this thought, but it's there, and the fact that it's there is interesting. Christian and non-Christian viewers alike may want to contemplate the central villain of the film, death. Many films, from the highbrow, art house Ingmar Bergman film The Seventh Seal, 1956, to the schlocky horror movie series Final Destination, 2000 to 2011, have death as their central enemy, and as Psalm 49 says, "Even the wise die, the fool and the stupid alike must perish." When, where and how a person might die can be influenced by their actions and the actions of their neighbors. Death in The Martian is not personified as in The Seventh Seal, but it is ever present. Every decision made by Watney and NASA becomes a choice to live and not die, and with each choice, the threat of death is present and real. Like a chess game, they work together to avoid the checkmate of death. At one point, Watney ponders how much time, talent and treasure are being expended to keep him alive and rescue him from his plight. Viewers also may want to consider how this theme is handled, especially in a world where life is valued less and less every day. From abortion, to euthanasia, to slavery, modern life is buffeted on every side with the selfish, callous cheapening of life. Yet both in Ware's book and in Scott's film we see the key themes of life's enormous value and the importance of protecting life in the face of death. The film has a certain optimism when held up against our society's present darkness. Watney reflects, every human being has a basic instinct, to help each other out. If a hiker gets lost in the mountains, people will coordinate a search. If a train crashes, people will line up to give blood. If an earthquake levels a city, people all over the world will send emergency supplies. This is so fundamentally human that it's found in every culture without exception. Yes, there are unpleasant people who just don't care, but they're massively outnumbered by the people who do. Jesus puts it more concisely when he says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." When death and physical harm loom, the challenge is to help and support those in danger, resisting the flip side temptation to abandon those in need, leaving them to their own devices. The Martian embraces the first of these ideas. It's a movie that loves, values and cherishes life, and respects the vocational endeavors of scientists and engineers in their work. The recent announcement that NASA has discovered signs of water on Mars has again piqued general interest in all things Martian. Scott's film undoubtedly taps into this curiosity. Filled with great moments of suspense and dramatic tension, The Martian is a well-executed thriller. Like Alfonso Cuarón's film Gravity, 2013, viewers need not be sci-fi fans to enjoy the ride that Scott offers.